TheBradRules!
Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles Turtles in Time is a classic Ninja Turtles game. Many would say it's the greatest Turtles game of all time, but the game has two versions, the initial arcade release and the SNES port. Both were huge successes, but there are quite a few differences between the two versions, so the question is, which one is better? So let's go over some of these points and figure out which is the superior version. Let's start with the intro. The arcade version kicks off with the turtles exploding through the screen and the Pizza Power theme from the Coming Out of Their Shells tour plays, while in the SNES version we get an intro very similar to the cartoon with the turtles exploding out of the sewer as an instrumental rendition of the classic 1987 cartoon theme plays. I have to give it to the SNES version here because this is a very good rendition of the theme, a better tune that fits the proceedings, and I prefer the imagery of the show's introduction being recreated. Next up is the graphics. Well, I have to give it to the arcade version here. It's more detailed, has bolder and brighter colors, has more frames of animation, and it has bigger sprites, meaning it's a better looking game overall. Look at Metalhead malfunctioning before he explodes in the arcade version. It just makes beating him way more satisfying, and it adds humor to the animation as well. Plus the turtles will turn around and show off their pizza slices when collecting the pizza health power-up in the arcade version. But in the SNES port, the turtles will still remark pizza time, but you won't get the animation. One big change I missed from the arcade version is the rainstorm is missing from the Skull and Crossbones stage. I love seeing the lightning bolts and rain pour down with a darkened sky looming overhead. In the SNES port, the weather doesn't change at all. This is probably the most obvious winner, really. Now, let's talk about the layout of the game, and this is a big plus for the SNES. I mean, come on, we've got an entire new stage and a pretty big one in the Technodrome. This stage is awesome. And although you still fight in the Technodrome in the arcade version during the final boss fight, you're not traversing it. Plus, the Technodrome is home to two boss fights, as Toka and Razor are moved to the stage from the Skull and Crossbones stage, and Bebop and Rocksteady are swapped instead. It's pretty hard to imagine a game this popular not featuring the two most popular villains besides Shredder and Krang, so I'm glad the SNES port rectified these glaring omissions. The other boss fight being one that is very reminiscent of the first Battletoads game, as you fling foot soldiers at Shredder, who is manning a machine, and this is an awesome way of making use of this gameplay mechanic. Once you defeat Shredder, he'll use the portal behind you to suck you into a time warp, which definitely looks a lot better than Shredder randomly doing it in the sewer surfing stage in the arcade version, where a hologram of Shredder appears and he informs you of what's going to happen. Instead of the hologram, you'll be treated to a Rat King boss fight in the SNES port, a villain who did not appear in the arcade version. Another big change that was made to the SNES version is in prehistoric Turtlesaurus, Cement Man is no longer the boss, and instead we get the far more popular Slash. Cement Man was a pretty unusual choice to include to begin with, because he really only had a few moments of screen time in a single episode of the cartoon, and actually didn't even get a name until the arcade game was released. He was brought to life from a movie billboard at the hands of Baxter Stockman using an alien crystal called the Eye of Starnoth. Speaking of Baxter Stockman, his Mouser robots make an appearance in the SNES version when they were absent from the arcade version. A pretty iconic enemy that deserved to show up again. Another famous robot that's in the SNES version but was omitted from the arcade version is the Roadkill Ronnies. The arcade version features these unique boxing robots, but the SNES ports swaps them out for the more iconic cable-wielding robots. Also, in the SNES port, Neon Knight Riders was reworked to incorporate Mode 7 effects to give the level a 3D-like effect, and it certainly makes the stage pop a lot more compared to the arcade version's solely 2D design. It also makes the stage feel a lot faster, and the turtles race around on their hoverboards and careen around turns. And Shredder got an upgrade to Super Shredder for the final boss fight in the SNES port, which certainly makes the fight feel more epic. The SNES port wins this category hands down. The villain selections are stronger, and there's more of them. A whole new level, and the improved Neon Knight Riders all make for a superior experience when it comes to how everything transpires in this game. The cutscene in the Technodrome also makes the story feel a lot cooler and more on brand for Shredder in terms of the 1987 cartoon. Now, how about the gameplay? Well, the Turtles' attack combos feel a lot different between the two versions, and they don't jump at the end of their combos in the SNES port, which I prefer. The decreased number of foot soldiers might come off as a bummer in the SNES port, but it makes things a lot more manageable. You'll be taking so many cheap shots in the arcade version due to the level of on-screen traffic and because the CPU is just cheaper in general. Plus, your life meter is smaller, and there's no surprise there because this is a game meant to work around you constantly pumping credits into it. Plus, the arcade version allows up to 4 players as opposed to the SNES port only allowing 2 players, so the greater amount of enemies is somewhat negated the more players you have with you. The trade-off is the foot soldiers may be less cheap in the SNES port, but they are more skilled. For example, there's foot soldiers who can block your attacks in the SNES port, which the arcade version doesn't have. And these foot soldiers with the flying discs in Skull and Crossbones can wreck your shit in no time flat. But these guys are very cheap, leaving you very little breathing room to retaliate without taking a hit. They're not that bad in the arcade version. The special attacks don't deplete health in the arcade version like it does in the SNES port, and this is understandable to make everything balanced out. You definitely need the special attack in the arcade version to fend off the large crowds of enemies. Overall, I have to say the SNES port just plays better. Everything feels tighter and more concise, and you feel like you have more control over the proceedings. Plus, I like having more challenging foot soldiers in terms of their combat styles instead of there being more of them, and they just gang up on me. Now it's time to talk about the sound, and this is probably the most subjective part of the game. There are way more voice clips in the arcade version, and I love the voice clips for the bosses and the turtles.
Pizza time! Turtle! Cool off, sucker!
The intro is also fully voiced.
This is April O'Neil reporting.
In the arcade version, the turtles make certain quips when they get hurt, and classic moments like Krang shooting his laser eyes at you in the first level is superior in the arcade version due to a cool voice clip being used to make the moment even more memorable.
Prepare to die!
However, the sound effects are better in the SNES version when hitting enemies. And come on, that kapow sound effect when you hit a boss in the SNES port compared to that soggy marshmallow sound in the arcade version is just flat out better. The music is often a very contested subject matter between the two versions, and although the arcade may offer higher quality sound, I have to say I enjoy the majority of the SNES renditions due to them sounding punchier, more bass heavy, and the melody also just comes across better, especially in a stage like Neon Knight Riders. Here, have a listen and you'll see what I mean. Then there's tracks like Starbase, where the arcade version trumps the SNES port. And the arcade version's boss music is still awesome, but the SNES version edges it out slightly. So really, the only category the arcade version outdoes the SNES port is when it comes to the graphics. The SNES port just feels right to me. Although Turtles in Time was on inferior hardware, it still looked good and managed to outdo it when it came to the tweaks made to the gameplay and even the sound. Even with many of the awesome voice clips missing from the SNES port, the ones you hear the most, which is when you hit your enemies, are better. And if I had to pick, I'll go with the sound effects I'm going to be hearing hundreds of times. So yeah, the SNES port is superior to the arcade version. So there you have it. No matter which version you're playing, Turtles in Time is a classic on both platforms. But the SNES port added to the experience, although certain concessions needed to be made. But they don't end up being huge flaws. I suggest playing both and enjoying what each version has to offer, and trust me, you'll be glad you did. So guys, let me know what your favorite version of Turtles in Time is. Is it the arcade original or the SNES port? I'd love to know, so let's discuss it in the comments below. And please subscribe if you haven't already. Click the bells to get all the notifications when I post on my new videos. I want to thank all my subscribers for your continued support. And thank you all for watching. I'll see you next time.